So I think there's this image that most filmmakers carry around of what a great director looks like. You know, the auteur with a concrete vision, decisive and unsentimental. It's Stanley Kubrick with a stopwatch, or David Fincher doing take 87. And you come away with this idea of an attitude and work ethic that you pick up from watching interviews and masterclasses and those kind of like director quote compilations that everyone ends up watching when they probably should be editing. But the wisdom of someone who's already succeeded to that level is very structurally different from the wisdom that I think you can actually use where you probably are right now. And the bit that I think is actually most dangerous is also often the bit that when you're listening to it or watching it often feels the most inspirational. So I want to talk to you about that kind of split. Although, yes, I'm very aware that a working filmmaker on YouTube giving you advice about advice has some level of irony to it. So you should probably apply the same skepticism to this whole video that I'm about to ask you to apply to everything else. Just before any of this comes across as me telling you to stop watching David Lynch interviews altogether, I want to be clear about what I'm actually saying, because I'm not saying that. A lot of advice from famous directors is genuinely brilliant. You know, Francis Ford Coppola talking about how every film he makes can be reduced to one word, like succession or morality, and how that single word is the thing he uses to make every single decision on set. That's a really useful idea, and you can take that into your next project tomorrow. Or Steven Spielberg saying that when he watches first-time directors' work, he isn't looking for technical perfection, he's looking for whether the story is actually compelling. That's also true, and also very useful. There's loads of stuff like that. So this isn't a famous directors are wrong video. It's a famous directors are giving you a very particular kind of advice, and you need to know how to read that advice video. The way I've started thinking about all of this is that I think famous director content basically splits into 3 buckets, and each bucket has a very different relationship to your career and your situation right now. The first bucket is craft, so how they came up with an idea, or why they chose a particular shot, or how they directed an actor through a scene, or how they thought about pacing in the edit. All of those kind of craft related choices, the actual making of the work. That stuff's brilliant, and you can study that for years and it will definitely keep paying off. The second bucket is career. So how they got their first feature funded, or how they ended up at Sundance, or how they navigated the business of being a director. And this is the bucket where things start to get a little bit dodgy, because their career is almost certainly nothing like yours. And what worked for them worked at a certain time in history and under a specific set of circumstances. And the third bucket is personality. So how they behave on set, how they treat producers, what kind of artist they've decided to be, the whole kind of like auteur vibe. And this is the bucket that I think is absolutely the most damaging one of all, because I think it also kind of gets absorbed without you fully noticing it, and it can do real harm to your actual prospects of working in the future. So I want to walk through that second and third bucket a little bit more, because I think, like I said, that's where I think the most damage gets done. The first bucket of craft you could mostly just keep enjoying without too many repercussions. So the reason I'm not a massive fan of career advice from very famous filmmakers is that you're only hearing from the people who it works for, which sounds very obvious when you say it out loud, but that is called survivorship bias. So for example, Tarantino was a video store clerk and then he made Reservoir Dogs. So now we have this kind of story where being a video store clerk is part of the path, except there were thousands of video store clerks at the time, and we don't hear from any of the ones who didn't go on to direct Reservoir Dogs because they didn't write books or get interviewed. They just went and got other jobs. Another issue is that successful directors tend to credit their own personality and choices for their success, when actually a huge amount of it was timing, context, luck, There's a thing called fundamental attribution error, which is basically where humans always overrate the role of personality in someone's success and they underrate the role of context. And that's why every successful person ends up sounding like they had this kind of like secret internal quality that the rest of us don't have. They probably didn't. They probably just landed in the right place at the right time with enough skill to hold on to it. And the last thing is that people who've already won often genuinely can't remember the conditions they came up under. There's quite good research in education on something called the expert blind spot, which is basically where the better someone gets at something, the worse they get at remembering what it was like not to know it. So even when famous directors are sincerely trying to help you, they're partly sort of guessing about what was actually useful and what wasn't. They're reverse engineering an explanation that sounds coherent, and some of it will be right, but a lot of it won't. So this kind of career bucket isn't always dishonest, it's just structurally unreliable and often not hugely applicable to you and your exact circumstances. But the bit I really wanted to talk about is this third bucket, the kind of personality bucket, because this is the one that no one sort of warns you about a lot of the time, and it's the one that absolutely does the most damage. So when you start watching enough Stanley Kubrick interviews or read enough about how David Lynch protected his vision at all costs, or watch enough of those kind of legendary stories about directors burning crews and refusing to compromise and treating producers like obstacles, you absorb something, not always consciously. You start to think that what makes them and made them great was that stubbornness and the refusal and that whole kind of like, I'm an auteur thing. And on some level, it's fair enough. For them, it kind of was. And they sort of earned that leverage for their behavior to be either ignored or accepted because of what they had made. The problem is that the personality of an auteur is like a luxury good. It only works once you've built the thing that protects it, which is this body of work and a reputation that means people will put up with you because of that work. Without that protection, what you've got is not auteur energy. You've just got someone who, excuse my French, is a bit of a cunt to work with. And working in filmmaking in the kind of trenches of it is one of the most reputation-driven industries that exists. Almost every job you get, or a lot of them, is from someone who worked with you before or someone they told. A producer told a producer, DP recommended another DP, crews talk, and the phrase difficult to work with doesn't read as uncompromising auteur if you're not yet the auteur. It reads as don't book them again. And once you've got that reputation, it's very hard to shake. There's another thing going on as well, and this one's like more emotional, which is that consuming a lot of this kind of famous director content can make you feel like a failure in a way that's sometimes hard to fully pick up on at first. Because, watching these interviews where, Chris Nolan talks about making his first feature, on a shoestring on weekends, or, Damien Chazelle making the short of Whiplash and then it turning into, one of the most successful features from a first-time director ever, or whatever else it is, you end up feeling like a failure by comparison to those guys. So you've got these two costs running in parallel. The first one is that you're feeling worse about your own work without anything else really changing. And then the second one is you're absorbing these personality habits that are quietly making you harder and harder to hire. And neither of these has anything to do with the directors themselves. They're just artifacts of how you're consuming that content. The other thing that's basically never said on kind of filmmaking YouTube, and I want to say it really clearly because I think it's really important, is that there is a vast kind of middle tier of working filmmakers that less and less people talk about. And these are the people making a good real living from being a filmmaker, doing work that genuinely moves people, owning their own time, picking projects that they care about, going on holiday, having weekends, making documentaries or commercials or branded films that, matter to the subjects and to the people who watch them. And they're not Christopher Nolan, but they're also not waiting tables and not making films at all. They're somewhere in the very large space in between those two things. And look, I'm not saying don't aim higher than that. If you want to be the next, Oscar-winning director, then absolutely fair enough. I'm not going to try and talk you out of it. But I really want to make it clear that there is absolutely nothing wrong with not wanting that and just wanting a good, happy life, making work you're proud of, and enjoying the process and enjoying life outside of that too. In fact, if anything, I personally think that's actually a more admirable goal to have. Just because you don't go on to win Oscars or Cannes Awards absolutely does not make you a failure or have less value as a person or a filmmaker. So if you've watched this far, firstly, thank you. And you're going, okay, fine, but what do I actually do with all this information? There are 4 things, and I think they are just small adjustments rather than, massive rebrands. The first one is keep watching the craft content, getting into the artistic and practical decisions of these filmmakers and absorbing that side of it is always going to be fantastic and gives you such a great insight into improving your own work. Just don't confuse it with a roadmap for their success. The second thing is replace the career advice content with content from filmmakers who are maybe 1 to 2 to 5 steps ahead of where you are. So people whose conditions look a bit more like yours than Tarantino's does. There's some fantastic YouTubers to follow. I'm going to shout them all out. Go follow Luke Forsyth or Curran Sheldon, who are both working documentary cinematographers who happen to be on YouTube. And note the order there, which is they are filmmakers first and then YouTubers second. There's guys like Giancarlo, who's a fantastic commercial cinematographer, or Jack at Western Approaches, and Keaton Nye, who are always talking about the kind of ins and outs of the career side of freelancing in the film world. And I'll link all their channels in the description below. And there's plenty others out there, but the qualifier I'd apply is, is this person primarily working as a filmmaker or are they primarily a YouTuber? Because the advice is structurally very different depending on the answer to which one of those they are. The third thing is the personality one. So just stop modeling yourself on directors you've never been on set with. Model yourself on the kind of filmmaker you'd actually want to work with yourself. The one you'd recommend to another producer. A filmmaker that still has perspective, but they also just have general manners and courtesy and are nice to be around. They're both of those things at the same time. That's the version that gets you that next call. And the fourth is to try and redefine success in terms you care about and actually want to measure. So, what's the income range you want to have? How often do you want to be working on set? Are you proud of your last 3 projects? Was the client happy? Are you sleeping? Did you get a holiday this year? That kind of stuff. It's much less dramatic than chasing prestige. But if you can just unburden yourself with that pressure and weight of needing to be, that 1% in order to define yourself as successful, and you find different ways to define that success for you, I promise you will almost certainly have a happier and more fulfilled life and career. And I know that saying that is easier than doing it. And there's something, slightly mournful about putting down a story you've been carrying potentially for years. So if you're feeling a bit deflated by all that, that's okay. It's just the story that you've written for yourself, starting to fade away, and you're mourning that story. But what's left, if you let it fade away, is a much more honest picture of what working life as a filmmaker in this industry can actually look like. And I almost guarantee it will be a better one. So I hope some of that was useful. I hate to ask this, but if you did enjoy it, please do give the video a like and maybe even subscribe to the channel, because it really does help massively with, you know, teeny tiny channels like mine. And then if you want to go a little bit deeper on the kind of hireability side of all this, you know, what actually makes producers come back to you and what makes them not, I made a video all about that and why people aren't getting hired even when they have fantastic reels or fantastic work. And it, you know, pairs quite nicely with this one. So, you know, go have a watch of that next if you enjoyed this.